Chair, Commissioner Weech, members of the public, and the HOC team. As indicated by the chair, our team provides updates and information pertaining to various aspects of our ultimate proposal for FY26 budget. And we do so in a manner that allows for the commission and the committee to have an opportunity to ask questions and also to share if there are any changes that occur as we continue to fine-tune the budget along the way. Today you will hear two presentations. The first will focus on our portfolio of housing. This is ultimately where you see reflected the work and the resources that we acquire from revenues in our oversight and management of our properties, the Opportunity Fund, Housing Fund. And so, of course, all of these budgets that are being proposed, and we've walked through how we approach them based on funds, reflect our goal to accomplish our strategic plan. Of course, this particular goal touches very closely to, or this particular budget aligns with our goal of expanding affordable housing, as well as ensuring that we're a world-class organization with regards to how we're able to provide resources and support to our residents. And so with that, I will turn it over to our CFO, Tim Getzinger, as well as Terry Fowler, our budget officer, to provide you with additional context and to walk you through this budget presentation.
Thank you, President Andrews. Good afternoon, commissioners. For the record, Tim Getzinger, Senior VP of Finance and CFO. Today, we will continue our discussions of the FY 2026 recommended budget and introduce any changes that have occurred since it was presented on April 2nd. As a reminder of the budget timeline, on April 2nd, there was the commission meeting in which we presented the President's FY 26 recommended budget. On April 11th, the FY 26 recommended budget book was released. On April 23rd, we held a BF&A meeting regarding the general and public fund budgets. And today, May 8th, we are meeting again in the BF&A to discuss the mortgage finance and real estate budgets, as well as the Opportunity Housing budget. And then on June 4th, we will be holding another commission meeting regarding the adoption of the fiscal year 2026 budget. And at or around July 31st, the approved budget book will be released. In this afternoon's session of the BF&A committee, David Wilson, financial analyst on the budget team, will present the review of the FY 2026 recommended budget for the Opportunity Housing Fund. Following that, Terry Fowler, HOC's budget officer, will present the review of the FY 2026 recommended budget for the mortgage finance and real estate divisions. The presentation will include a discussion of any changes that have occurred and their impact on the budget that will be presented for adoption on June 4th. And with that, David Wilson will present the first item. David, you are up.
Thank you. Good afternoon, commissioners, President Andrews, staff, and the viewing public. For the record, my name is David Wilson, financial analyst in the budget office. Today, I will present the FY 2026 budget for the Opportunity Housing Fund. We can begin by moving to slide 2 on the packet, page 8. Okay. This chart represents the FY 2026 agency recommended operating budget as presented at the April 2nd, 2025 commission meeting. At that time, we presented a budget of $375.9 million that was balanced with a draw of $1.9 million from the General Fund Operating Reserve, or GFOR. Please turn to slide 3, page 9. This chart presents the FY 2026 agency revised operating budget, summarizing the changes made on April 23, 2025. We begin with a balanced budget using reserves. The revised budget now shows a surplus of approximately $93.4 thousand based on increased funding from the management fees earned from the Housing Choice Voucher Program. Can we please turn to slide 4 on page 10? Okay. This chart represents an overview of income in the Opportunity Housing Fund for FY 2024 through FY 2026 that now includes a trailing 12 months as of December 31st, 2024. This chart is broken out into operating and non-operating income. You will note that the non-operating income is highlighted in light blue. On the chart, let's look at the changes from FY 2025 amended budget. The income for FY 2026 recommended budget is $121.68 million, the majority of which is based on rental income, net of concessions, and vacancies, coupled with income from retail space, laundry and parking income, and various fees. In addition, federal funding of $42,000 from the McKinney grant, which reimburses certain costs for utilities for units at Montgomery Arms. Miscellaneous income of $143,000, and finally, transfer between funds of $1.35 million includes county funds for various costs as well as funding for shortfalls at a few properties that are being covered by transfers from existing property cash or the GFOR account. Looking at tenant and non-dwelling income, increased $8.67 million or 7.8% from the FY 2025 amended budget, mostly due to higher gross rent potential based on the 2025 County Executive Volunteer Rent Guideline of 3.3% at most properties and the acquisition of Battery Park. Vacancy loss is projected to increase $871,000 or 11%, reflecting elevated vacancy loss experience at several properties during the current year. Proactive leasing efforts are underway. However, recovery will take time as lease enforcement efforts stabilize. Current trends are positive and stabilization is projected by mid-FY 2026. Income transfers decreased $704,000 from FY 2025 amended budget, largely due to changes in the projected draws from existing reserves or cash based on property performance and the impending sale of Brookfield Road. Reductions were partially offset by increase in reimbursements for rental license fees from the county based on increased fees charged to the properties. Now let's look at the changes from the T12 as of 12/31/24. Tenant and non-dwelling income increased $11.99 million or 11.1%, mostly due to higher gross rent potential based on the 2025 County Executive Volunteer Rent Guideline of 3.3% at most properties. The transfer of Forest Oaks Towers from calendar year to fiscal year and the acquisition of Battery Park. The non-dwelling income decreased primarily from the pending sale of Brookfield Road. Vacancy loss is projected to decrease 31.1% or 3.84 million as progress is made with lease enforcement and units are reoccupied. Miscellaneous income has decreased $224,000, mostly based on one-time refunds of prior year taxes for a few properties that were received during T12 period. Investment interest income has decreased $117,000. In 2024, most bank accounts were moved to interest-bearing accounts to benefit from the higher rates being offered at the time. Staff is working to determine the amount being earned on unrestricted cash balances to determine an appropriate budget for FY 2026. The property budget will be adjusted accordingly before the proposed budget is presented in June for adoption. Can we turn to slide 5, please? Page 11 in the packet. Slide 5 reflects the distribution of the sources of funds of $121.68 million to support the Opportunity Housing Fund. You can see the tenant rents make up $116.72 million or 95.93% of the fund's revenue. The remaining 4.07 comes from transfer between funds of $1.35 million or 1.1%, non-dwelling income of $1.12 million or 0.2%, laundry and parking income totaling $1.19 million or 0.98%, other rental related fees of $431,000 or 0.35%. Miscellaneous income of $143,000 or 0.12%. Other tenant income of $679,000 or 0.56%. And grants of $42,000 or 0.04%. Now can we move to slide 6, please? I think that's page 12 on your packet. This slide shows details of the expenses in the Opportunity Housing Fund for FY 2024 through FY 2026. We have now included the trailing 12 months as of December 31st, 2024. You will notice that non-operating expenses are highlighted in light blue. Let's look at the changes from FY 25 amended budget. The FY 2026 recommended budget includes expenses of $120.50 million. Overall, expenses increased by $7.58 million or 6.7% from FY 2025 amended budget due to increases in most operating expense categories. This was partially offset by reductions in tenant services, insurance, and taxes, coupled with an increase in debt service, primarily based on the acquisition of Battery Park, increased reserve contributions, increases in restricted cash flow, and development corporation fee expenses that represent unrestricted cash from the properties. Now let's look at the changes from the T12 as of 12/31/24. Overall expenses increased by $3.76 million or 3.2% from the trailing 12 as of 12/31/24. This is primarily due to increases in most operating expense categories, partially offset by a reduction in bad debt, tenant services, protective services, and maintenance, coupled with a net increase in debt service, increased reserve contributions, an increase in restricted cash flow, and development corporation fee expenses that represent unrestricted cash from the properties. Okay, if we can please turn to slide 7, number 13 on the packet. This chart reflects the distribution of uses of funds in the Opportunity Housing Fund. The chart shows the breakout of operating and non-operating expenses. You can see from the pie chart on the left that expenses from the properties are nearly equally divided between operating expenses of 56.56% and non-operating of 43.44%. The three largest operating categories are personnel, 18.51 million or 15.36%, operating fees of 18.33 million or 15.2%, and maintenance of 11.42 million or 9.48%. Bad debt accounts for 3.14 million or 2.61%. The remaining operating categories include operative and administrative and operating costs, utilities, insurance and taxes totaling 16.76 million or 13.9%. Now, the pie chart on the right breaks down the non-operating expenses. The largest non-operating category is debt service of 41.19 million or 34.17%, followed by contributions to reserves, which account for 4.14 million or 3.43%. Finally, the distribution of cash flow to development corporation fees of 4.42 million or 3.67%, and administrative cash flow of 2.62 million or 2.17%. Now we can move to slide 8, please. That's on page 14 of your packet. This chart reflects the 5-year history of total property cash flow, which is broken into 3 categories. You've got development corporation fees, unrestricted cash flow, and restricted cash flow. As you can see from the chart, total projected cash flow has increased approximately 1.84 million for FY24 recommended budget when compared to FY25 amended budget. The increase is largely due to increased development corp fees from Barclay Apartments, Glenmont Crossing, Magruder's Discovery, and Paddington Square, partially offset by decreases at the Metropolitan and VPC2. There's a removal of cash flow deficits at Barclay Apartments, increased cash from Barclay Affordable, Forest Oak Towers, and Westwood Towers, and the addition of cash flow from Battery Park. That's partially offset by decreased cash flow from Bradley Crossing and VPC1, and the addition of cash flow deficit at State Rental Partnership, in the addition of restricted cash flow at Battery Lane, Battery Park, and Bradley Crossing, and increased restricted cash flow at Southridge, partially offset by decrease in restricted cash flow at the Metropolitan Development Corp. Now, if we could move on to slide 9. Thank you. The final chart is slide 9, represents the FY 2026 agency revised operating budget, summarizing the changes made thus far. We have not introduced any additional changes. Therefore, the revised fund summary represented at the beginning of this presentation remains unchanged. At this moment, I want to thank you for your time and consideration. Are there any questions?
Paul, you have any questions?
Yeah, David, I've got a couple of just really basic questions. So thank you for going through this. The first one is early on, you said we expect stabilization by mid-2026. And I wanted to ask, how do we define stabilization? Is it an occupancy level that we're achieving, or what? Anyways, what's that mean?
Primarily, that's it. It would be getting occupancy where it needs to be.
Is that defined?
Yes, and I'll jump in here for you, David. It's a combination of occupancy and bad debt, and we're working through lease enforcement at each of our sites.
Numbers different for each property.
Yes, there's we provided an overview of the properties that have the highest amount of bad debt that we're tackling by way of lease enforcement. Those are the properties where the NOI is, of course, impacted by the bad debt. And we gave projections in regards to the timeline for stabilization for those properties. We are on track with each of those properties that we're moving through lease enforcement on. And so it's a combination of lease enforcement as well as getting the units quickly released.
Okay, but stabilization means we achieve a goal, and the goal of the property, but we achieve a goal of consistency of rent payments and reduction in bad debt.
Right. Obviously, just the goal for each of our properties is to have a positive NOI. And so that's, of course, and that means being able to cover debt service. That means having the utilization stabilize, drawing in the amount of revenue from our tenants, and ultimately being able to cover all of our expenses.
Okay, but different. The word stabilization means different things for different properties.
Well, across the board, yes, they all have different levels of utilization and expenses that were a part of the underwriting for each of the properties in the beginning, but ultimately, stabilization across the board means a positive NOI. There are some properties that do have a structural deficit, and those are properties where the commission is already aware, for example, Metro Point, etc. But, and there are some properties that do have a negative NOI, but they're offset by some of the properties that, so it is a complex question in terms of what that should look like.
Yeah, I just want. Thank you. That I appreciate that. My second question for David, and maybe for anyone else, is how do I think about the trailing 12 when I compare it to our recommended 2026? I mean, I'm used to comparing it to the previous year. You know.
For the record, Terry Fowler, Budget Officer. You are correct, Commissioner. Typically, we do compare our budget to the prior year. More recent, as we've been going through fluctuations, we've been asked by the Commission for additional information on how has actuals been compared to what we budgeted for the prior year. So we have added the T12 to give you some of the recent actual history on top of what we anticipated. As you can see, the T12 includes half of a year from fiscal 24 and half from fiscal 25. So it is to show you that not only how does it compare to what we thought would happen in 25, but also what has happened in 25 thus far.
Yeah, I'll study it more. Thank you, Terry. I mean, I guess I got what the number was. I was trying to think about it in terms of understanding 2026.
Right. It just
Yeah.
gives you some additional information on recent trends.
Yeah, no, and I'll study it more. Thank you.
You're
Thank you.
welcome.
I'm good for now, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, I had a couple of points. Certainly this budget and opportunities fund now that shows you a net of $93,000, which is a revision from what we had seen earlier. And so I think what it also demonstrates is that we are starting to see the impact of the work that's being done to deal with managing our portfolio in terms of rent collections and income coming from the work that's been done on these properties. So I think that's a positive report as relates to looking at the previous budget and this amount, because now we don't have to draw as much from the Opportunity Housing Reserve Fund. So that's a good thing. So also a question, this is just a very small point related to the VRG. In one point, it said that it was going to apply to all properties, and another point it says it's going to apply to most properties. So it's just a simple, is it most or is it all?
Again, Terry Fowler, Budget Officer.
What's it?
So the VRG does apply to all properties. However, there are certain properties within our portfolio that are not able to apply the VRG. So that is the reason for the term most, because it does apply to all properties, but there are certain circumstances under which you cannot apply a rent increase. And we do have a handful of properties where there is no rent increase budgeted for fiscal 26.
Yeah, and that was explained earlier, and then so I understood what most was. Then I saw the word all. I said, well, what is it? So just make those things consistent, okay?
Yeah, that I apologize for that oversight. They both should have said all.
You know,
I mean, most. Sorry.
see there, I
Most.
confused you.
See, you got me confused.
No. So other than that, I mean, Paul, I can understand your question about the trailing 12. And I mean, in earlier conversations we had about earlier budget information was being presented, that trailing 12 got created as a way just to look at what was the most recent comparison point for the last 12 months, that in this case overlaps with 2 fiscal years. So that's what that was done. Because I remember when I saw it, I remembered that, well, how do we get this trailing 12? And that's what it is. Yeah. So thank you for being responsive to the staff about trying to answer that question about what has been the comparison between the previous 12 months. So thank you for that. I don't have any other questions.
Thank you, David.
All right. Thank you.
And since it's just you and me, Paul, I want to thank the staff for the presentation on the fund, on this fund, Opportunity Housing Fund, and we will now go to the second presentation that we're going to have presented, and this one relates to the items that cover in our housing resources division.
This will be the mortgage finance and
Real estate
real estate
division.
development budgets.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
So
And
I'll turn to you, Chelsea.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. This budget and presentation will focus on our developments. It's really dependent on timing and sequencing and when we receive our development and our commitment fees. So you will have noticed that in the preamble, there definitely are disclaimers that there may be modifications and or adjustments, but this is the best point in time budget that we can advance, reflecting the income that we receive from mortgage finance, commitment fees, and real estate development fees. With that, I will turn it over to the finance team for the presentation.
Thank you, Chelsea. And thank you, David. Great job. That is your first time presenting, so we applaud you for your performance there. Good afternoon, Commissioners, President Andrews, staff, and the viewing public. For the record, my name is Terry Fowler, Budget Officer at HOC. and I will be presenting the FY 2026 recommended budget for the mortgage finance and real estate divisions. If we can turn to slide 2 on page 7 of the packet. As was mentioned previously, we always start our presentations with showing you where we began. And when the recommended budget was presented on April 2nd of this year, we had a balanced budget of approximately $375.9 million with a projected draw of $1.874 million from the general fund operating reserve, which is in alignment with how we have balanced budgets in prior years. Now, you'll see shaded in blue, unlike the previous presentations that you have seen, which focused on individual funds, today's meeting will involve discussions related to all 5 funds of the agency budget: the general fund, multifamily and single-family bond funds, the Opportunity Housing Fund as it relates to the Opportunity Housing Reserve Fund, or OHRF, and the county grant section of the public fund. If we can move to slide 3 on page 8 of the packet. Since there were no additional changes introduced in today's review of Opportunity Housing, the chart on page 8 of the packet reflects the changes that were introduced on April 23rd. We show the surplus of approximately $94,000 that will adjust the projected draw from the Opportunity Housing Reserve. However, we will introduce additional changes during this presentation. If we can move to the next page, slide 4 on page 9 of the packet. Similar to what you saw in the previous presentation, the chart on 9 shows a 5-year history of the mortgage finance division. Again, you will notice non-operating income and expenses are shaded in light blue. Unlike the previous presentation, which showed a T12, the mortgage finance division, as Chelsea mentioned, has stable income from loan management fees and stable expenses as it is primarily staff and fee related. But there are fluctuations in the commitment fees due to timing and changing in size of the development deals that are generating the fees. Therefore, a T12 is not a great indicator of comparison point. As mentioned, the division generates loan management fees and commitment fees, and loan management fees has been a stable, consistent source of income to the division and to the agency over the years. And then we have the commitment fees that are the fees earned by transactions that are financed by HOC and monitored for loan and regulatory compliance. Commitment fees are split with 40% unrestricted and going to the general fund to support agency operations, and 60% is restricted to the OHRF for future capital investment in real estate development deals. The portion of income to the general fund supplements the unrestricted cash from our properties to support agency operations. You will see the revised budget column with the commitment fees shaded in a darker blue. The FY26 recommended budget included commitment fees of approximately $4.8 million, which was a decrease of approximately $2.3 million from the FY25 amended budget. Of the amount, approximately $1.9 million was unrestricted and $2.9 million was restricted. Changes were made after April's recommended budget presentation, and based on revisions in the size and timing of the projected development deals, the FY 2026 revised budget now includes fees of approximately $5.52 million, which is an increase of approximately $765,000 from the recommended budget, of which approximately $2.21 million will be unrestricted and 3.31 million will be restricted. As President Andrews mentioned, we are doing a budget that is based on a point in time, and development deals are actually authorized and approved via the Development Finance Committee and Commission, and those can change throughout the year. So these fees are based on the best information that we have at this moment. If we can move to slide 5 on page 10.
Terry,
Yes, sir.
before you move to the next slide, the point you just made about the fact that this is a point in time is so important, so that when the commission gets into looking at sometimes in 26, we start seeing amendments or revisions to the budget. And in many cases, it tracks right back to this performance on commitment fees and timing for those. So this is a very important slide. I think that people understand that they can understand better those movements that occur in our budget modifications.
Yes. And I also do want to mention that the majority of the operating costs for the mortgage finance division, the administrative cost, is actually funded from drawdowns from the respective bonds, the single family and multifamily bonds. A very small portion of the division is charged to the general fund, although the division generates a significant amount of money for the agency and agency operations. If there are no more questions, can we move to slide 5 on page 10 of the packet? Thank you. This graph on page 10 shows in pie form the breakout of the FY 2026 revised projected revenue of $14.675 million that was previously discussed. Again, as you can see, commitment fees of $5.52 million make up approximately 37.63% of the revenue generated. Again, 3.31 million or 22.58% is restricted to the OHRF, and 2.21 million or 15.05% goes to the general fund to support agency operation. The bond draws to support the administrative cost of the multi and single family programs account for 4.88 million or 33.27%. The FHA risk sharing is approximately 1.02 million or 6.93%. These are the fees paid into the general fund from the properties that are financed under that program. And when we move to the expenses, you'll see a corresponding and equal expense as those funds are restricted to the FHA risk sharing reserve. The counting closing cost grant equates for $205,000 or 1.4%, and that is for the administrative cost of that program. And finally, loan management fees represent $3.05 million or 20.77% of the total income. Moving to page 12, slide 6 of the packet. I think we've moved one to, I'm sorry, it's page 11. I gave you the wrong number. Thank you so much. The graph on page 11 shows the breakout of the FY 2026 projected expenses of the division of $6.296 million that we previously discussed. As you can see, personnel is the largest piece of the expenses. It makes up $3.22 million or 51.21%. Other operating expenses total $154,000 or 2.45%. Management fees are $1.837 million or 29.17%. Mortgage insurance and trustee fees account for $64,000 or 1.02%. And finally, as mentioned previously, the FHA risk sharing of $1.02 million represents 16.15% of the expense. Now, if we can move to page 12 of the packet. This chart depicts the 5-year detail of the real estate division, again with non-operating income and expense highlighted in light blue. The transfer between funds reflects the draw from the OHRF to pay for real estate development salary and benefits that are directly related to the development deals, as well as pre-development funds related to projects that have not yet been fully developed. The costs are only drawn if the expenses cannot be directly charged to a particular transaction. In addition, the FY 2026 budget also includes a draw of approximately $105,000, which represents the 0.05% commitment fees assessed on outstanding loans from the PNC line of credit and real estate lines of credit. Again, the cost will only be drawn if the expenses cannot be directly charged to a particular transaction. Similar to commitment fees, development fees are split, with 40% being unrestricted to support agency operations and 60% restricted to the OHRF for future capital investments. You can see again, we have a revised budget for our projected development fees. When the FY 2026 recommended budget was presented, it included fees of approximately $6.84 million, a decrease of $5.9 million from the FY 2025 amended budget, of which approximately $2.7 million was unrestricted and $4.1 was restricted. Based on revisions in the size and timing of the projected deals that will generate fees for fiscal 26, the revised budget now includes $5.96 million, which is a decrease of $877,000 from the recommended budget. And the split of those fees is approximately $2.385 million unrestricted for agency operations and $3.578 million restricted to the OHRF for future development deals. If we can move to the final page 13 of the packet, this chart represents the FY 26 agency revised operating budget, summarizing the cumulative changes made thus far to the recommended budget. And again, we presented a recommended budget of approximately $375.9 million. The shaded in the green represents the changes that were made based on changes in the public fund, and the purple lines represent and summarize the changes made in this discussion. The impact of the changes to income and expenses introduced in this presentation is a decrease of approximately $45,000 in fee income to the general fund and a decrease to fee income to the OHRF of approximately $67,000. The change in the OHRF will result in less income being restricted to the fund. The change to the general fund, combined with the surplus of approximately $93,000 presented earlier, results in a net surplus of $48,000, which would decrease the projected draw from the general fund operating reserve from $1.87 million to $1.83 million. I do want to mention, however, we do anticipate there will be additional changes before the budget is presented in June for adoption. These will include updates to our personnel complement and indirect cost model allocation, grant refinements based on final awards, and potential property cash flow and commitment fee revisions based on refinancing instructions that may impact the final draw that is projected from the general fund operating reserve. The reconciliation that will be presented at June 4th to the commission meeting will include the impact of any changes and the projected draw from the general fund operating reserve. This brings me to the end of the presentation of the FY 2026 Mortgage Finance and Real Estate Division budget presentation, and I will be happy to answer any questions you may have at this time.
Oh, do you have any questions?
Actually, Roy, I don't at this time.
That's fine. We have plenty of time. This is a presentation, so if there are questions that come up as a result of further review, certainly feel free to get those back to Chelsea, and the staff will be able to address those. One is, Terry, is this allocation that we have of the 40% that goes to operating and unrestricted, and the 60% to restricted uses. How is that formula arrived at? I've just always accepted it as what it is, and I just always wondered how is that determined, and what is it? What would be the considerations to if we were to change that allocation formula?
Right. I'm going to turn it over to President Andrews. I do want to mention that split has been in place for some time. This question has come up over the years, and I therefore turn it over to President Andrews to address how we may look at this going forward.
Yes. And this is a great question, Mr. Chair. This has been a historic practice, and it may even be reflected in the budget policy from many years ago that the board adopted. Obviously, the goal here is to ensure that we're able to fund future development as well as provide some revenue to the overall operations. We have had internal discussions in regards to how much reliance our budget should have on development and finance fees, if there's a way to potentially restructure where at times where the development or commitment fees don't come in to potentially use the leftover OHRF instead of reserves. There's been ongoing discussion about the pros and the cons of each approach. Obviously, having to look at even the pipeline and the capability of the OHRF to accommodate those types of shortfalls. But this is a practice that's been in place. We have on occasion, and Tim has made recommendations to the commission whenever there have been shortfalls to delay the split until there has been stabilization, and that has happened in the past as well. But this is definitely an area that we can have further discussion with BF&A, and I will say that internally we have, and Tim has been leading the effort to do analysis on how we might want to think about this split and approach in the future.
Yeah, and I know there's something you all have been talking about this, especially as relates to the current environment that we're in right now, that is having an impact on developments, both from the standpoint of the terrorists and other things that have potentially will affect the going forward in terms of even projects that are already penciled and already permitted and whatnot. So I think I thought about that today because I was reading an article, I think in the Biz Now or something, that was talking about the compression of this going on, and not so much in the residential so much right now, but certainly in the commercial and industrial side, what's going on in terms of the number of permits and square footage that's being either planned and held in abeyance. So I know at some point in time we could see it. So I know you all have been having this conversation, so I'm not trying to revisit that. I know you all are on top of that. But it does. I just was curious because I know ever since I've been on the commission, it's always been this same 40-60. And so I guess my curiosity just got me today. So I just wanted to.
No, it's a great question. And it's not just about the 40-60. Obviously, it just requires also the commission and staff to recognize that there will be shifts in terms of timing. And July 1 closing could mean that we didn't meet budget for the prior fiscal year based on these projections. So just understanding the volatility of timing, and we have had really great partnership, of course, with the commission understanding that, but we continue to raise that up, especially in the public, because if ever there is a shift or a budget shortfall, wanting to be clear that the budget does rely on a current revenue source of 40% of these commitment and development fees coming to the overall budget.
Yeah, no.
So,
Thank
all
you
right,
all
well,
for that.
thank you for the question.
If there are no other questions, and either myself or Paul, I want to thank the staff for the work that's been done to make both these presentations, and I really appreciate the slides and the explanation behind those. It's certainly much easier to follow. This can be very difficult following numbers, so I appreciate your effort, and we look forward to I guess this will be the last of these kinds of sort of like presentations like that, because when we get back into the calendar on May 8th, that will be when you all bring the actual proposed budget for us to adopt.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, and great work, team. We will, if there are any changes, we will make sure that we notify the committee as well as, of course, the commission when we're making that final budget recommendation.
Well, thank you all, and the meeting of the Budget Finance and Audit Committee is adjourned as of 1:53 p.m.
Thank
Thank
you.
you all very
you.
much.
Perfect.
you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, everybody.
And Paul, please try to enjoy your vacation.
Thank you. Thank you. It's pouring rain here in Santiago, Chile today,
Oh, okay,
but we're expecting better weather the next 10 days.
good, very good.
All right. Thank you,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.